Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping straight into a skill that's, well, pretty fundamental whether you're in sales or honestly just trying to get the best outcome in.
Right.
Any kind of deal, really. Mastering negotiation. We've looked through some really sharp insights on this, and our goal today is to help you walk away from negotiations feeling like, you got a great result, and crucially, without leaving opportunities or money on the table.
Exactly. We've taken some really effective negotiation principles and tried to boil them down to what truly matters. The aim is that by the end of this deep dive, you'll have practical strategies you can, well, start using right away.
Okay, great. And to give everyone a clear path, we're going to explore 7 key areas. These are things that can really sharpen your negotiation skills we're talking about. 1, the power of the opening move.
Crucial.
2, navigating the negotiation maze. 3, sealing the deal with finesse. 4, thinking beyond the bottom line.
Very important.
5, the closer's toolkit. 6, decoding your buyer, the psychology bit. And finally, 7, turning roadblocks into bridges. So let's get started.
Let's dive in. So our first area, the power of the opening move, it really focuses on those critical initial moments. You can think of it like setting the stage, maybe like the first few moves in a chess game. They really influence everything that follows.
Right, those opening gambits. And the core idea here, it might seem a bit counterintuitive at first, but it's apparently incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
Always aim higher, ask for more than what you realistically expect to get.
Precisely. And there are several really compelling reasons why this strategy works so well. Firstly, it just instantly creates maneuvering room, negotiating space. By starting with a more ambitious offer, you have room to make concessions later without dipping below what you actually need or, want.
It's like building in a cushion for yourself, isn't it?
Yeah.
And secondly, I read that a higher initial price can actually make what you're offering seem more valuable in the buyer's eyes. Sort of signals higher quality.
Absolutely. It can subtly signal a more premium solution. And here's a kind of fascinating psychological point. When you negotiate downwards from that higher starting point, it actually lets the buyer feel like they've secured a win, they got a better price, even if they end up paying exactly what you were hoping for all along.
Huh. So they feel good about the deal they fought for.
Exactly. It's clever, right?
So, okay, what if you don't aim high enough? What are the downsides of starting too low, or maybe just right where you expect to land?
Well, the most obvious risk is simply leaving money on the table. You might accept an offer that was way less than what the buyer was actually prepared or even happy to pay.
Right.
And furthermore, if you immediately snap up their first offer, or if your first offer is really low and they accept immediately, it can actually make the buyer uneasy. They might start thinking, that was too easy. I probably could have gotten an even better deal.
That's interesting. It almost backfires by raising suspicion. And I guess it could also hurt how they perceive the value, couldn't it? If your price is surprisingly low, they might wonder about the quality, like, what's wrong with it?
Exactly right. It can raise those little red flags in their mind. Now, we see this principle, this start high idea, in action all the time in the U.S. market. Think about real estate listing prices are almost always set a bit above the expected sale price precisely to allow for that negotiation, that back and forth.
Oh, yeah, you totally expect to haggle on a house price.
Right.
And car sales. That's another classic example, isn't it? The sticker price is just the opener.
Just the starting point for the conversation, precisely. Dealerships absolutely build that negotiation room into their initial pricing. And if you look at B2B, like enterprise software sales, companies often give initial quotes that bundle in a range of features and services, knowing full well that some of those might get negotiated out to reach the final price point.
Okay, so it's pretty common practice among savvy negotiators. What are some of the mistakes competitors make then by not doing this, by not starting a bit higher?
Well, one frequent misstep is just too quickly accepting a low initial offer from the buyer. Like we said, this can make the buyer second-guess themselves. Another big one is leading with their absolute best offer right out of the gate.
Leaves no room to move.
Zero room. And it potentially means they miss out on a higher price the buyer might have actually been willing to pay. And maybe the most crucial error is failing to properly justify a higher initial price.
Yeah.
You can't just pluck a number out of thin air. You have to clearly articulate the value, the benefits that make that starting point credible.
Right. You need the story to back it up.
Yeah.
So for our listeners who want to actually put this into practice, what's the best way to approach it? How do you figure out how high to go?
The key concept here is determining your MPP, your maximum plausible position. This is the highest price or set of terms you can realistically ask for while still, maintaining credibility and not completely scaring the buyer off.
Maximum plausible.
Okay. Then you start your negotiations somewhere closer to that MPP. But crucially, you also need to communicate your willingness to discuss, to be flexible. There's a great quote, actually, from Henry Kissinger on this. Effectiveness at the conference table depends upon overstating one's demands.
Huh. That's pretty blunt. So, okay, practical example. If you're ultimately aiming for, say, a $10,000 service contract, your initial proposal might be pitched around $12,000.
Exactly. And you'd proactively highlight all the comprehensive benefits, the significant value that justifies that 12K figure, while subtly signaling that there's room for a conversation to find that mutually agreeable point, maybe closer to $10 or $11.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So that's the opening. What about the middle? Let's move into section 2. Navigating the negotiation maze. Yeah. This is where the real back and forth happens, right?
Exactly. This is where the strategic maneuvering really kicks in, those middle rounds after the initial offers are on the table.
And we're talking about key techniques here. The sources mention things like using higher authority and the art of trading off. Can you break down what makes these middle gambits so effective?
Yeah, these are incredibly valuable tools for maintaining control and ultimately reaching your goal. Using higher authority, for instance, can give you significant leverage.
How so? You mean like, I need to check with my boss?
Precisely that. Or the committee needs to approve this. Or policy requires. By indicating you need approval from someone else, even if you could technically make the call, you gain valuable time. Time to evaluate their offer, consult, strategize, without feeling pressured into an immediate yes or no.
Ah, okay. So it's the strategic pause button, basically. Avoids being rushed. And what about trading off?
Trading off is really the heart of aiming for those win-win outcomes. It involves strategically making concessions on issues that are maybe less critical for you in exchange for getting concessions from the buyer on things that matter most to you.
So give a little on point A to get something better on point B?
Exactly. It's about finding where you and the buyer have different priorities and leveraging those differences. And a really critical part of this, maybe the most important part, is to always seek something in return for every concession you make. Ask for reciprocity.
So no freebies?
No freebies. This prevents a negotiation from becoming just a one-way slide where you're constantly giving ground, chipping away at your position without getting anything back.
That sounds like a powerful way to stop that feeling of just being relentlessly pushed down on price or whatever the main point is. So what happens if you don't use these middle game strategies? What are the risks?
Well, you might find yourself feeling backed into a corner pretty quickly. Pressured to make decisions on terms that aren't really favorable. You could end up giving away valuable concessions, maybe on payment terms or delivery or scope without getting anything of comparable value back, which directly hits your profit.
Ouch.
And you might just face constant pressure for more and more concessions, leading you to a final deal that really doesn't meet your original objectives at all.
Okay, so how do we see these strategies being used effectively by U.S. companies? Any examples?
Oh, definitely. Large retail chains, for instance, often limit the discount authority of their frontline staff. For anything significant, the salesperson will say, "Let me get my manager right." That's deploying higher authority.
Classic.
Classic. Or think about automotive suppliers. They might offer a price reduction on parts, but only if the car manufacturer commits to a longer-term contract or guarantees larger order volumes. That's trading off in action.
Right, exchanging price for volume or commitment.
Exactly. And consulting firms. They might agree to accommodate a client's request to change the project scope, but in return, they'll negotiate for more time, pushing out the deadline. Again, a clear trade-off.
Makes sense. So where do competitors often mess up in this crucial middle phase?
A really common mistake is just readily granting concessions without asking for anything back. This sets a terrible precedent, basically telling the buyer, hey, just keep asking, I'll keep giving.
Signals weakness.
Big time. Another mistake is revealing their full decision-making power too early. If the buyer knows you can approve anything, it makes it much easier for them to push you right to your limit. And finally, some negotiators get tunnel vision on price. They focus only on the dollar amount, completely missing opportunities to trade on other variables like delivery, support, payment terms that could lead to a much better overall deal for both sides.
So the key takeaway is be strategic, be proactive, and always look for the trade. How can listeners apply this?
Make the trade-off gambit almost a reflex. Whenever a buyer asks for a concession, your immediate thought, and often your verbal response, should be something like, okay, if we can potentially do that for you, what could you do for us in return?
Always link the give with a get.
Always. It could be, like you said, a lower price for faster payment or a commitment to a larger first order, maybe agreeing to be a reference customer, positive testimonials. There are lots of possibilities. And don't be afraid to strategically use higher authority, even if you do have the final say. It buys you thinking time, reduces pressure, and can sometimes subtly encourage the other side to sweeten their offer to help you sell it internally.
Right. It gives you that strategic distance.
Okay.
That's really practical. Let's move on then to section 3, sealing the deal with finesse. This is about the end game, right? Closing it out.
Exactly. This is where all the earlier work comes together. You're transforming the discussion into a signed agreement. And here we're focusing on what the sources call ending gambits, specifically a technique called nibbling, and also understanding patterns of concessions.
Nibbling. That sounds a little cheeky. What exactly is that in negotiation?
It is a bit cheeky, but effective. Nibbling is the tactic of asking for small, relatively minor additional concessions or benefits right after the main agreement seems to have been reached. It's often framed as just one last little thing.
Ah, okay. So the main price is agreed, everyone's relieved, and then you say, oh, by the way, could you just throw in free delivery? Or something small like that.
Precisely. Or expedited shipping at no extra cost. Or maybe a small additional service. It can be surprisingly effective because the other party is often psychologically committed to the deal by then and might just concede the small point to get it finalized. It can subtly increase the total value for you.
Unique.
Yeah.
But I can see how it works. And what about patterns of concessions?
This is about being mindful of how you make concessions throughout the negotiation. The size and frequency of your concessions send signals. If you consistently make large concessions, the buyer will likely expect another large one at the end. If you strategically reduce the size of your concessions as you get closer to your target.
It signals you're nearing your limit.
Exactly. It manages their expectations and helps prevent them from anticipating big price drops right up until the handshake.
Okay, so what are the main benefits of using these ending gambits well?
Well, nibbling, as we said, can directly bump up your profitability or the overall value through those small last-minute additions. Managing your concession pattern helps you control the buyer's expectations and signal your final position more effectively. And maybe most importantly for the long game, leaving the buyer feeling positive about the process, feeling like they got a fair deal but didn't completely squeeze you dry, strengthens the relationship for future business.
Right, avoids buyer's remorse. And what are the risks if you don't manage this final stage carefully?
You might just flat out miss potential upselling or add-on opportunities if you mentally check out once the main price is agreed. You could unintentionally set an expectation that you're an easy mark for price reductions in future deals if your concessions were too large or too predictable. And yes, if the buyer feels they had to fight tooth and nail for every tiny thing and maybe pushed you too far, they might get buyer's remorse later, which definitely isn't good for building loyalty.
So how do successful U.S. companies use these closing techniques? Any examples of nibbling or concession patterns?
Oh, yeah. Software companies, for instance, after they've settled the main license or subscription fee, might then nibble by suggesting, say, an optional training package at a slight discount, or maybe throwing in premium support for the first 3 months.
A little extras.
Exactly. Subscription services might offer a slightly longer free trial period or a minor upgrade to the next tier as that final push to get you to sign up. And in retail, you see it all the time. They agree on the price for the TV, and then they offer a small discount on the wall mount or the extended warranty. That's a classic nibble.
Those point-of-sale add-ons. Okay. And where do competitors mess this up? What are the common mistakes in the endgame?
A big one is just being unprepared for those last-minute nibble requests from the buyer. They feel ambushed, caught off guard, and often just concede to get it over with without getting anything back.
So they get nibbled on.
Exactly. Another mistake is making concessions of roughly the same size throughout the whole negotiation, like dropping the price by $500, then another $500, then another $500. This signals they probably still have more room to give. And some negotiators mistakenly reveal all their potential sweeteners or final concessions way too early, losing the strategic value of holding something back for the very end to close the deal.
Right, using up all your ammo too soon. So for listeners wanting to really nail this final stage, what's the practical advice?
First, be aware of the power of nibbling, both using it yourself and defending against it. After the main agreement is reached, before everything is signed, consciously look for small additional things you could reasonably ask for that would add value for you. Frame them as minor considerations.
Just one more thing.
Exactly. And crucially, pay very close attention to your concession pattern. Don't make concessions of equal size. As you get closer to your bottom line, your concessions should get smaller and smaller. This is a powerful signal. So if you're negotiating down from, say, $15,000 towards $14,000, maybe your first concession is $500, the next is $300, and the final one is maybe just $200. That clearly signals, okay, folks, we're really scraping the bottom of the barrel now.
Got it. Smaller steps signal the end is near.
Hmm.
Okay, let's pivot now in section 4 to something really important, beyond the bottom line. This challenges that idea that price is everything, right?
It absolutely does. It's a crucial shift in perspective. It's so easy, especially in sales, to get hyper-focused on price, price, price. But this section forces us to ask, what else is really driving the buyer's decision?
And the core idea here, which is fascinating, is that buyers might actually want to pay more, not less, if they see enough value.
Exactly. Our sources really highlight this. Buyers often are willing to pay a premium, sometimes significantly more, provided they perceive sufficient value, benefit, or solution to their specific needs and what you're offering. It's not always about the lowest number.
That kind of flips the script on traditional sales thinking, doesn't it? So what are the benefits of really digging in and understanding these non-price motivations?
Well, first off, you can often achieve higher sales prices and better profit margins because you're focusing your efforts on effectively articulating and demonstrating the value you deliver, which justifies that price. You also tend to build much stronger, more satisfying customer relationships because you're genuinely addressing their core needs and problems, which often go way beyond just saving a few bucks.
Builds loyalty.
Absolutely. And when that high value is really clear and compelling, the buyer's sensitivity to the price point naturally decreases. The price becomes less of an obstacle.
Okay, so conversely, what are the big dangers of focusing almost entirely on price as your main negotiation lever?
You risk getting sucked into destructive price wars, which just erode profitability for everyone in the market. You tend to attract customers who are only motivated by the lowest price, and those customers are often the least loyal. They'll jump ship the second someone else undercuts you.
The race to the bottom.
Exactly. And maybe worst of all, you completely miss opportunities to provide solutions that address the buyer's deeper, maybe even unstated needs and aspirations. You're just selling a commodity based on price, not a valuable solution.
So how do we see successful U.S. companies really tapping into these non-price motivations? Any good examples?
Oh, tons. Think about Apple. They command premium prices across the board. Why? Not because they're the cheapest, obviously, but because of their intense focus on design, user experience, ecosystem, and that powerful brand image.
Right, it's the whole package.
It's the whole package. Or look at luxury car makers, BMW, Mercedes, etc. They emphasize status, performance, cutting-edge technology, exclusive features, all things that justify a higher price than a basic A to B car. And value-added service providers, like high-end consultants or specialized B2B services, they always highlight their deep expertise, their proven reliability, their ability to customize things that go way beyond just being the low-cost option.
So they're selling outcomes and confidence, not just hours or widgets.
Precisely. And what are the common mistakes competitors make when they fail to look beyond the bottom line?
Well, a frequent one is just constantly resorting to discounts and lowering prices to try and win deals. This can seriously damage their brand perception over time. They become known as the cheap option, which isn't always good, and it obviously hammers their profitability.
Right.
They might also fail to really differentiate what they offer beyond just price. They become interchangeable with competitors, essentially a commodity, forcing them to compete solely on price. And often, they just don't invest the time or effort to truly understand the buyer's underlying needs, priorities, and pain points. So they completely miss the chance to sell based on value.
Okay, so for our listeners who want to make the shift, how do they practically start tapping into these deeper buyer motivations?
The fundamental shift is moving the conversation from being primarily about price to being primarily about value. You have to really internalize that buyers have a whole spectrum of needs beyond just minimizing costs, things like reducing risk, saving time, improving efficiency, enhancing their own reputation, achieving specific goals.
Finding the real problem they're trying to solve.
Exactly. Your job is to build desire by clearly showing how your specific offering directly solves their unique problems, makes their life easier, boosts their performance, or enhances their status or reputation. And a really practical technique for handling the inevitable price objection is the feel, felt, found formula.
Feel, felt, found. How does that work?
So when a buyer says, wow, that price seems high, you first empathize. I understand why you feel the price might seem a bit higher than expected. Then you normalize their feeling by relating it to others. Actually, several of our other clients initially felt the same way when they first saw the proposal. And then you pivot to the positive outcome and value. But what they found was that the increased efficiency, or whatever the key benefit is, and the long-term savings, or ROI, actually provided them with the best overall value and solved their problem most effectively.
That's smooth. Acknowledge, relate, then refocus on value. I like that.
It takes the confrontation out of it and shifts the focus back to the benefits. Okay, that's a really valuable framework. Let's move on then to Section 5, the Closer's Toolkit. This is about the specific tactics, the strategies you use to actually get the yes right to secure the deal.
Exactly. Knowing how to close effectively is, well, obviously critical. You can do everything else right, but if you fumble to close, it's all for nothing. It involves understanding the natural flow of a sales interaction and knowing which closing technique to use and when.
So what are the key benefits of really mastering these different closing techniques? Why is it so important?
Well, first, good closing encourages faster decision-making from the buyer. It helps overcome inertia and prompts them to commit, which obviously shortens your sales cycle. You'll definitely see a higher conversion rate, turning more prospects into actual customers. And it also reduces the chances of the buyer getting cold feet or changing their mind after they've verbally agreed. It solidifies the commitment.
Makes sense. And conversely, what are the negative consequences of having, weak closing skills if you're hesitant to ask for the business?
You'll just lose sales, plain and simple. Sales that you probably should have won, lost purely due to buyer indecision or stalling, which you failed to overcome. You'll find yourself stuck in frustratingly long sales cycles, wasting precious time and resources chasing deals that never seem to close. And every delay just gives your competitors more time and opportunity to swoop in and potentially steal the deal away from you.
Okay, so being timid at the end is costly. What are some of these tried and true closing strategies that successful companies in the U.S. often use?
There are quite a few, tailored to different situations. In retail, for example, you often hear variations of the "that wouldn't stop you" close, or sometimes called the minor point close. If a buyer raises a small objection late in the game, like, "I'm not sure about the color," the salesperson might counter with, "Okay, so setting the color aside for a moment, is there anything else preventing you from moving forward with this today?" It isolates the objection.
Tries to confirm everything else is okay?
Exactly. In software sales, particularly B2B, the subject to close is pretty common. The salesperson might start filling out the paperwork or contract subject to resolving the buyer's final remaining concern. It creates forward momentum. And in situations where the buyer seems genuinely torn, like in real estate maybe, the classic Ben Franklin close can be effective.
To a pros and cons list.
Exactly. You literally draw a line down a piece of paper, list the reasons to buy on one side, and ask the buyer for reasons not to buy on the other. Often, the pros list ends up looking much stronger, helping them justify the decision visually.
Interesting. And where do competitors typically stumble when it comes to closing? What are the common closing mistakes?
Probably the single biggest mistake is simply failing to ask for the sale directly. They present the information, maybe answer some questions, and then just wait, hoping the buyer will take the initiative, which often they don't.
Assuming the sale will just happen.
Right. Another big error is timing. Trying to close too early before they've really built enough value or desire or adequately address the buyer's concerns, that feels pushy. Or conversely, waiting too long, letting the peak moment of interest pass and losing all the momentum they'd built. And finally, just not effectively handling those last-minute objections. They let a small concern derail the entire sale instead of using a technique like "that wouldn't stop you" to isolate it and keep things moving.
Okay, so for our listeners wanting to get better at closing, what's the essential advice? How do they build this toolkit?
First, it's crucial to understand the basic stages of selling. Think of it as prospecting, then qualifying, then building desire, and only then closing. You absolutely cannot effectively close until you've done a good job building desire and establishing value in the buyer's mind.
Don't rush the process.
Don't rush it. Then, once you sense the time is right, be prepared to use a variety of closing techniques. Don't rely on just one favorite. The silent close can be incredibly powerful. Present your final offer or proposal, and then just be quiet. Let the silence create pressure for the buyer to respond.
The power of the pause.
Absolutely. The "that wouldn't stop you" close is great for those minor objections. The Ben Franklin close works well for analytical types. There are others too, like the assumptive close, so shall we schedule delivery for Tuesday? The key is to choose the technique that feels most appropriate for the specific situation, the buyer's personality, and where you are in the conversation. And then you have to actually do it. Ask for the business.
Be confident and ask. Okay, great advice. Let's move now to section 6, decoding your buyer. This feels like it goes hand in hand with everything we've discussed, really understanding the person across the table.
Oh, absolutely. It's fundamental. Negotiation isn't just about tactics and numbers. It's about human interaction. Understanding your buyer's unique personality, their communication style, their underlying motivations, it's all essential for tailoring your approach and achieving a better outcome. You need to try and figure out their primary negotiating drive and their general personality style.
So what are the big advantages of getting good at this, developing this kind of insight into buyer psychology?
Well, first, it enables you to adapt your own communication style to connect better with them. Are they fast-paced and results-oriented? Or more relationship-focused and needing rapport? Adjusting your style builds trust much faster.
Builds that connection.
Exactly. It fosters stronger rapport. And maybe most importantly, from a strategic viewpoint, it allows you to choose and use negotiation strategies that are more likely to resonate with their specific motivations and how they see the world. It's about speaking their language.
And what are the risks if you don't bother trying to understand your buyer on this level? If you just treat everyone the same?
You risk miscommunication, friction, even outright conflict if your style clashes badly with theirs. You might end up using negotiation tactics that are completely ineffective or even counterproductive for that specific individual because they just don't respond to that approach. And it makes it much, much harder to build those positive long-term relationships that are often the real goal beyond just a single transaction.
Right. It can feel impersonal or like you're not listening. So how do successful U.S. companies approach this? How do they try to decode their buyers systematically?
Well, technology plays a role. CRM systems, customer relationship management are huge for this. They track past interactions, purchase history, stated preferences, even notes on communication style, allowing salespeople to have a much more informed and personalized conversation.
Using data to personalize.
Exactly. Many companies also invest heavily in sales training that specifically covers different personality models like DISC, Myers-Briggs variations, etc., teaching salespeople how to recognize different styles and adapt their approach. And for key accounts, large customers, you often see dedicated account management teams whose entire job is to build deep understanding and strong personal relationships over time.
Investing in that understanding. And where do competitors often fall short here? What are the mistakes?
A really common mistake is just using a completely standardized one-size-fits-all sales pitch for every single buyer. It lacks personalization and often fails to connect. They might also misinterpret buyer reactions, seeing caution as disinterest or politeness as agreement, leading to totally wrong assumptions about their needs or intentions. And some negotiators just get so focused on their own agenda, their own targets, their own desired outcome, that they completely fail to genuinely consider the buyer's perspective, their pressures, their goals. This creates a very adversarial feel right from the start.
It becomes a win-lose instead of potentially win-win.
Exactly. So what's the practical advice for listeners? How can they get better at decoding their buyers in real time?
It starts with observation. Pay really close attention to the communication style. Are they talking fast, slow, using lots of data, telling stories? Watch their body language. Try to get a feel for their dominant personality type. Is this person primarily pragmatic, focused on results, efficiency, the bottom line? Are they more extroverted, outgoing, enthusiastic, relationship-focused, maybe amiable, cooperative, supportive, conflict-avoidant, or more analytical, detail-oriented, data-driven, needing proof?
And once you have a hunch,
You consciously adapt your approach. With a pragmatic type, be direct, get to the point, focus on results. With an extrovert, build rapport, share enthusiasm, talk about vision. With an amiable type, be supportive, build trust, offer assurances. With an analytical, provide data, answer questions thoroughly, be patient.
match their style.
Match their style. And also try to figure out their primary negotiating drive. What seems to motivate them most in this context? Is it purely competitive, getting the absolute best deal possible, winning? Is it solutional, finding the optimal fix for their problem? Is it personal gaining status, recognition, or avoiding personal risk? Or is it organizational, doing what's best for their company, team, or department?
So you tailor the offer to the drive.
Exactly. If you sense a strong organizational drive, you emphasize how your solution benefits the entire company, boosts efficiency across teams, aligns with corporate goals. If it's personal, you might highlight how it makes them look good, reduces their workload, or minimizes their risk. Tailoring the message to their core motivation makes it much more compelling.
Okay, that's powerful stuff. Right, we've reached our final section, section 7, turning roadblocks into bridges. Because, let's face it, negotiations don't always go smoothly. Sometimes you hit a wall.
Absolutely. Challenges, disagreements, outright impasses, they're almost inevitable sometimes. So this final section is all about having strategies ready for handling those problem negotiations. This includes navigating those tough impasses, dealing with angry or upset customers, and always keeping in mind the bigger picture of striving for win-win outcomes for long-term success.
So what are the key benefits of getting good at this? Being an effective problem solver when things get tough in a negotiation.
Well, most obviously, you'll be able to salvage deals that might otherwise completely fall apart. Deals that look dead can sometimes be revived with the right approach. You'll also maintain positive professional relationships even during difficult conversations, which is absolutely crucial for future business. Getting through a tough spot together can actually strengthen a relationship sometimes. And personally, you'll build immense confidence in your ability to handle challenging situations, making you a more resilient and skilled negotiator overall.
And the downsides if you don't handle these roadblocks well, if you panic or get defensive.
You'll lose deals. Simple as that. Deals lost due to unresolved issues or escalating conflict. You can severely damage customer relationships, sometimes irreparably, during contentious negotiations. This can lead to negative reviews, bad word of mouth.
Reputational damage.
Yeah, exactly. You might develop a reputation yourself as being difficult, inflexible, or just unpleasant to negotiate with, which will definitely hinder your future efforts.
Okay, so what specific strategies do successful U.S. companies use to navigate these inevitable bumps in the road?
Well, for dealing with angry or upset customers, customer service teams are often rigorously trained in de-escalation techniques. The feel, felt, found method we discussed earlier is a prime example showing empathy, normalizing the feeling, then refocusing on solutions.
Using empathy as a tool.
Definitely. When facing a negotiation impasse where you're stuck on a key point, sales managers often empower their teams to use something called the set-aside gambit.
Set-aside gambit? What's that?
It's where you acknowledge the point of disagreement, but suggest temporarily setting it aside to focus on other, perhaps easier issues where you can find agreement. The idea is to build some positive momentum and goodwill by resolving smaller points, which can sometimes make it easier to come back and tackle the tougher issue later with a more collaborative mindset.
Break the deadlock by going around it for a bit.
Exactly. And for really complex, high-stakes disputes where the parties are deeply entrenched, companies aren't afraid to bring in professional help, like using mediation services with a neutral third party to help facilitate a resolution.
Right. Sometimes you need an outside perspective. And where do competitors often go wrong when they hit these roadblocks?
A really common and usually disastrous mistake is getting defensive or argumentative with an angry customer. It almost never helps. It just pours fuel on the fire and escalates the tension.
Makes things worse.
Always. Another mistake is treating an impasse like a final, absolute dead end. They hit a disagreement and just give up too easily, without really exploring alternative solutions, creative compromises, or trying that set-aside gambit. And a fundamental error is reverting to a pure win-lose mentality when things get tough. They focus solely on their own position, digging their heels in, completely disregarding the other party's needs or perspective. This might occasionally win the point, but it often destroys the relationship in the process.
Sacrificing the long-term for a short-term win.
Precisely. So what are the key principles listeners should remember to effectively turn these roadblocks into bridges? How do they handle the tough stuff?
First, if you're dealing with an angry or frustrated buyer, immediately reach for that feel, felt, found formula. Empathize, validate their feelings, then gently pivot towards solutions. It's incredibly effective at de-escalating. When you hit a genuine impasse on a specific issue, seriously consider using the set-aside gambit. Acknowledge the difficulty, suggest parking it for a moment, and find something you can agree on to rebuild positive momentum.
Keep the conversation moving.
Keep it moving. And always, always remember that the ultimate goal, especially for sustainable business success, should ideally be a win-win outcome. Both parties should feel like they've gained something of value and were treated fairly. Don't get stuck with tunnel vision on just one issue, like price. Actively look for other variables you can trade on payment terms, delivery schedules, support levels, future business commitments, different service packages.
Broaden the scope of the negotiation.
Exactly. By focusing on the underlying interests behind each party's stated positions, you can often uncover creative solutions that satisfy everyone. So if price is the big sticking point, maybe you explore extended payment terms to ease cash flow, or bundle in some additional valuable services at no extra cost, or even suggest a slightly different product configuration that meets their core needs but fits their budget better. Be flexible and creative.
Excellent. Well, with that, we've navigated all 7 of these key secrets to mastering sales negotiation. From really understanding the power of that opening move,
Starting high.
to skillfully maneuvering through the middle game with trade-offs and higher authority,
Navigating the maze.
to sealing the deal with finesse, using nibbles and concession patterns,
The end game.
and crucially, looking beyond just the price to understand value and buyer motivations.
Very important.
Using the right closing tools at the right time, decoding the buyer's psychology, and finally, having strategies to turn those inevitable roadblocks into bridges. These principles, if you apply them thoughtfully and consistently, can truly make a huge difference in crafting more profitable and, just as importantly, mutually beneficial agreements.
Absolutely. And it's worth repeating. Negotiation is a skill. It develops with practice, with conscious effort, and with reflection. The more you actively try out these techniques, analyze what worked and what didn't in your own negotiations, the more effective and, frankly, the more confident you'll become over time.
So we really encourage everyone listening to take these insights and actively try to put them into practice in your next negotiation, whether it's a big sales deal or something smaller. And just as a final thought to maybe mull over, consider how understanding nonverbal communication, things like body language, microexpressions, tone of voice, might add yet another layer to your negotiation effectiveness. We didn't dive deep into that today, but it's definitely a fascinating area worth exploring further on your own.
A whole other level of decoding.
Exactly. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping straight into a skill that's, well, pretty fundamental whether you're in sales or, honestly, just trying to get the best outcome in.
Right.
Any kind of deal, really. Mastering negotiation. We've looked through some really sharp insights on this, and our goal today is to help you walk away from negotiations feeling like, you got a great result, and crucially, without leaving opportunities or money on the table.
Exactly. We've taken some really effective negotiation principles and tried to boil them down to what truly matters. The aim is that by the end of this deep dive, you'll have practical strategies you can, well, start using right away.
Okay, great. And to give everyone a clear path, we're going to explore 7 key areas. These are things that can really sharpen your negotiation skills we're talking about. 1, the power of the opening move.
Crucial.
2, navigating the negotiation maze. 3, sealing the deal with finesse. 4, thinking beyond the bottom line.
Very important.
5, the closer's toolkit. 6, decoding your buyer, the psychology bit. And finally, 7, turning roadblocks into bridges. So let's get started.
Let's dive in. So our first area, the power of the opening move, it really focuses on those critical initial moments. You can think of it like setting the stage, maybe like the first few moves in a chess game. They really influence everything that follows.
Right, those opening gambits. And the core idea here, it might seem a bit counterintuitive at first, but it's apparently incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
Always aim higher, ask for more than what you realistically expect to get.
Precisely. And there are several really compelling reasons why this strategy works so well. Firstly, it just instantly creates maneuvering room, negotiating space. By starting with a more ambitious offer, you have room to make concessions later without dipping below what you actually need or, want.
It's like building in a cushion for yourself, isn't it?
Yeah.
And secondly, I read that a higher initial price can actually make what you're offering seem more valuable in the buyer's eyes. Sort of signals higher quality.
Absolutely. It can subtly signal a more premium solution. And here's a kind of